Thinking about how to describe Bioshock, the word that keeps popping into my head is ambivalence. The concept of having two separate, contradictory emotions about the same thing. Is it well put together? Yes, but sometimes no. Is the story good? 66% of the time yes, 33% of the time no. Is the gameplay fun? Yes or no, depending on exactly what minute you ask me. But whatever the game's objective quality, it has stuck in the popular culture of gamers like an ice pick. It brought the conversation, and has a lot to dissect in its fine details. Hence why now, almost 2 decades after its release, there are still people who want to get into those details. And if I want to get into those gritty specifics, there's no better way than to just go from start to finish. I've never been one for intros, so thank you for being here, and let's get right into it. Bioshock begins in 1960 with protagonist Jack traveling home on an airplane crossing the Atlantic. A trip that's interrupted when the plane makes a fiery crash into the ocean, and unfortunately Jack was the only one to pay attention to the in-flight safety briefing, leaving him as the sole survivor of the wreck. There's actually an interesting bit of trivia, as this intro was one of, if not the last thing to be added to the game. Originally, the game began with Jack already in the sea following the crash and went on from there. However, at some point during playtesting or post-production, it was revealed that audiences were confused about exactly what happened. So this bit was added at the last minute, also explaining why this was the one and only time in the entire game that Jack speaks. This was 2007 after all, still well within the era of the silent protagonist. In the aftermath of the crash, Jack is left within swimming distance of a skyscraper-sized lighthouse. Taking shelter inside, there's a truly massive bust of a man leering over the entrance, with a banner that reads, "No gods or kings, only man." Deeper inside, there's a bathysphere where, as Jack pulls the lever and decides to go on an adventure, there's a video shown of the same man. This is Andrew Ryan. On the cover of Bioshock, there's a picture of a bouncer type Big Daddy, whose suit is based on some wacky French design from the late 1800s. It's big, scary, unique, and gets the point across that this game has to do with being underwater. However, if the bouncer didn't appear on the cover, it would be Andrew Ryan there instead. Because he's him. He's the guy. Andrew Ryan is the guy who made all of this possible by building a city named Rapture. A city at the bottom of the ocean. Which inspires one thought. That's awesome! But why? Well, you see, Mr. Ryan here was a bit of a Howard Hughes type, in case the character design didn't make that obvious. Big money, big personality, and fucking massive paranoia. So in 1945, when the United States dropped the concentrated power of the sun on 2 cities in Japan, and the USSR wanted to get in on that action too, Andrew Ryan didn't like where this was headed. He already wasn't too keen on the big world governments, but now they had the power to take everybody down with them. So Ryan funded the building of a self-sufficient community under several billion tons of water to ensure that he and everyone else would be safe from the nuclear holocaust. The ultimate doomsday society. However, as Jack arrives in the welcome area to Rapture, things have become a little unhinged. The first thing he sees is a man getting disemboweled by a woman with hooks for hands and a massive cancerous growth covering one eye. Things have gone very wrong, with the only person who seems normal being a voice on the radio identifying himself as Atlas. But everybody else appears as though they went to the Leatherface beauty salon, yet talk as though everything is totally normal. So what the hell went wrong? It's a fact that there have been more trips to the moon than to the bottom of our ocean. It's uncharted territory at its maximum, but there's a lot more stuff living down there. So when Rapture was built, it had unintentionally set up shop right next to an incredibly significant spot. the home of this rare little sea slug that produced a groundbreaking genetic goo that will become known as Adam. And what did Adam do? Well, it might be quicker to name what Adam couldn't do, because if it had to do with genetics, Adam was the one-stop shop. You want to be taller? Adam's got you covered. You want to be younger? Adam's got you covered. You want different color hair, eyes, or even skin? Adam can provide all of that. You want no more cancer? Easy. You want tons more cancer? Even easier. Acting as a sort of stem cell augmentation, building up or altering elements of the human body, the stuff was incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous. Not just for radical health risks, though there were plenty of those, but also because Adam enabled people to reach beyond what was ordinarily possible, such as being able to shoot lightning from a person's fingertips. Oh, but stick with me now because my story gets worse. You see, Rapture was founded with a sort of libertarian or laissez-faire form of governance and culture. Rules and regulations were kept to an all-time minimum, intending to let the genius and creativity of gifted people expand without limits. Though as a byproduct, unrest spread throughout the city as certain groups were able to use underhanded tactics to run their competition out of business. Such as one case between two competing grocery store owners which left both men dead in a shootout. But once Adam was added into the mix, things started to come apart at the seams. Because sure, it's their body, their rights, but there's no 10-day waiting period on the ability to light someone on fire with a snap of your fingers. Moreover, Rapture was a highly competitive marketplace for pretty much everything. Resources are tight at the bottom of the North Atlantic, where even oxygen isn't guaranteed. And as any Frostpunk player will tell you, even people are a resource. So let's say for example I'm hiring stevedores, people who move things around the docks. Do I want to hire the guy who can lift 100 pounds with his arms, or the guy who can lift 200 pounds with his mind powers? Sorry nerd, time you started to hit the juice. Side note, do not juice. This caused tensions to rise to a breaking point, erupting on January 1st, 1959, in a calm and rational civil war that ended up killing most of the population. And the people that were left alive were those numerous but radically changed freaks, disfigured and insane after so much genetic splicing, leading to their common title, splicers. And it's one of these mutants that Jack sees when his submersible docks in Rapture. Gameplay-wise, splicers come in a number of varieties. First, there are the thuggish, who attack in melee. Then there are the leadheads, who use guns. The nitro splicers, who throw explosives. Spider splicers are the type with hooks that crawl around on the ceiling. And finally, there are the Houdinis, who do the whole teleport behind you gimmick. However, the real interesting part, at least to me, is that each splicer model in-game has their own name and personality. Let's look at the first type to be encountered in the game, the one with the giant tumor covering one eye. That model is known as the Rosebud. Her design is meant to evoke a sort of Eastern European blue-collar woman, with all her dialogue following this theme of a mother looking for her lost child. There is a lot of dialogue just for her, and I do mean a lot. For attacking, for running, for quiet moments, for being set on fire, and when they can, having enough smarts to dive into the water. And this isn't unique to just the Rosebud. Another model, a personal favorite of mine, is called the Breadwinner. This wreck of a wannabe chief executive in a dissolving suit, constantly raving about how he's gonna run Rapture one day, because he's the top dog and everyone else just doesn't know it yet. Truly, they were the Sigma males of their time. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the Ducky, a paranoid police constable who I love for the simple reason that their name is Ducky. Of course, these three and every other type of splicer will immediately attempt to murder Jack on sight as a trespasser within the city. Ryan sees to that when he catches wind of Jack and sets every single mutant left alive in the city on his trail. But it's in these broken personalities that there's a reminder that things weren't always like this. They're all monsters beyond reason now, but there's still a fraction of the person they once were inside of them, stumbling around in confusion, fear, and pain. It's quite horrifying when you think about it. And it is very easy to get into, as one of Bioshock's big claims to fame is an abundance of audio logs. In an effort to document his city's rise, Andrew Ryan made sure audio tapes and recorders were readily available to the populace, just not for free. This let a number of citizens record their take on things before, during, and after things fell apart. There are a number of one-off characters in these logs, including one of the best fake accents you will ever hear.
In 10 years in this dump, I've come to accept a very low standard of life. But even at the bottom of this fish tank, a man must have standards. The pathetic Trudeau down at Morley Winery
Oh my
has
God.
started putting water to his terrible wine. Water! When I confronted him with this fact, he tells me, Pierre, this is not to worry. The water, she is distilled. It could be worse. I could take it right from the ocean.
That man is offensively French. And there are also a number of recurring characters in these logs, such as one Bill McDonough. There's quite a bit to discuss with Bill, as he's the functional protagonist of the book, Bioshock Rapture. If you want to know my thoughts on that book, it's good when it's adding things to the canon, like the day-to-day life in an underwater city, but it's bad when it's just retreading elements that were already said in-game. The book has a very bad habit of directly repeating audio logs from the game, that most, if not all, players have already heard. But Bill is a high point of the story as an average man given the ear of Andrew Ryan. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Bill was Ryan's best friend. Together, the pair formed a complete unit. Ryan as the leader with grand ambitions and finances, Bill as the doer getting boots on the ground. A mutually beneficial partnership. But as the Civil War brewed, and Ryan became more tyrannical in an effort to maintain his control, Bill began to pull away from him, ultimately attempting to assassinate Andrew Ryan if it meant stopping the madness. However, Bill was unable to pull the trigger on his best friend, and after a failed escape attempt from the city, Bill was apprehended and executed, though he was able to secure the escape of his wife and daughter. And all of that, minus the wife and daughter part, who are entirely characters of the book, that is all laid out in audio recordings in the game, painting a clear picture and timeline of how things went from bad to worse on a personal level. Back to Jack for a second. With the promise of helping them both escape from the city, Atlas aids Jack as he travels through the medical district. Along the way, Jack outfits himself with various firearms left over from the war, including a Thompson submachine gun. That has nothing to do with anything, except you always gotta point out a Tommy gun when you see it. With this expanded arsenal, guidance from Atlas, and the able assistance of some Adam for himself, Jack is able to take on a new foe, a creature known as a Big Daddy. More Rapture story time. As I would hope you all know, the ocean is not a passive thing. It's dangerous, reckless, and really likes to kill people when they act stupid. Meaning that it's not enough just to build a city at the bottom of the ocean and you're all set. No. The place needed constant maintenance both internally and worse, externally. But due to the dangerous and highly specialized nature of that work, there were few willing takers. So enter the Big Daddy. To begin, an individual was taken from any of the poor, unfortunate, or later on politically unpopular souls around Rapture. This person was then augmented with an absolute ton of Adam to turn them into a two-legged rhinoceros. During that same time, they would be functionally lobotomized to turn them into a sort of genetic automaton. Then, finally, sealed into a heavy diving suit. And I do mean sealed, as their organs, most notably their skin, would become fused with the suit's outer layer, leaving them as this sort of trundling armored behemoth only able to communicate in sort of whale-like moans. They are so cool. While the Big Daddies would begin development for city maintenance, by the time they reached full-scale production, their role had changed significantly. As demand skyrocketed, the supply of Adam failed to meet Rapture's needs. In order to solve this, a solution was needed and found in little girls. For whatever reason, when the slug was implanted in the stomachs of these girls, they could produce 30 to 40 times as much of the goo. And as people died around the city, these little sisters, as they would be known, would be sent out as worker bees to reduce, reuse, and recycle. But oh no, the splicers want to splice more, and here are these little girls as walking atom factories, prime and defenseless targets for the mutants. So pair a little genetic lab rat with a big genetic lab rat, and hey presto, there's your solution. Big Daddies come in two forms: the bouncers, big guy on the cover with a drill for his arm and many eyes, fantastic design, and the Rosie, who was originally supposed to repair leaks with a massive rivet gun, but as a protector uses that tool instead to pin splicers to the wall. Also, Rosie the Riveter. Took me way too long to get that joke. There was also a third type known as the Slow Pro, intended to shoot out cannonballs from a shoulder-mounted weapon. No joke. The model was created, though cut due to time and gameplay constraints. Now, up to this point, I've been pretty neutral or positive towards Bioshock. However, here is where I have to slap it around just a little for the game's most infamous failure. With a Big Daddy neutralized, Jack is left with a choice of how to deal with a little sister. He may either absolve her of her condition as an exploited drone, returning her to the little girl she once was, or tear the slug out of her still living guts. It is genuinely that simple. A binary moral choice system, as was the style of the late 2000s to early 2010s. Press 1 if you're feeling nice, press 2 if you're feeling naughty. No need for nuance, no need for subtlety, no room for arguments or moral gray areas. Do you help the little girl or stomp on her face? I don't need to tell you that 9 out of 10 people picked option 1, and that 10th person was just doing a bit for a YouTube video. Now, the in-game argument is that you get more goo for yourself if you kill the girl. A narrative benefit or a functional benefit. Except, as anyone who's played the game will tell you, that's not actually true. For every 2 or 3 little sisters saved, Jack receives a little present with a bunch of goodies, including Adam. So in this case, narcissism and altruism are working hand in hand. Also, in my own personal experience playing on hard mode, guns still work fine. They have plenty of upgrades and don't require any goo at all. So good job, Splicer Jimmy, you've sacrificed your body, mind, and soul to become this genetic monstrosity, and in the end you still got cut in half by the Chicago typewriter. Nice job. That's actually close to a consistent problem I've had throughout the game, completely forgetting I had my Atom powers, called plasmids. They were useful, don't get me wrong. Fire melts ice, giving me access to more supplies. The game makes ample opportunities of enemies in water, and I have an electricity power. A plus B equals toaster in the bathtub. And there are a number of machines like automated turrets that need to be shocked before I can hack them. But it's in combat that the plasmids completely fell off for me. Because, let me put it to you this way. I have my gun, and I see a splicer. I can transition to my plasmid, which takes a second, and shock him. Then transition back to my gun, which takes another second, and shoot him. Or I could just shoot him. The game's intended way to deal with the nitro splicer is to catch their grenades and throw them back with the telekinesis plasmid. But I would never be able to transition from my gun to my plasmid in time to do that. And even when I did, I had a consistent problem of grabbing the mask off their face instead. I keep pulling the masks off, but not the fucking bottles. Let me make this explicitly clear. I'm not advocating to get rid of plasmids entirely. I don't want the game to be more generic, like Call of Duty Under the Sea, though they could make use of their popular fish AI. Rather, the point I'm trying to make is that forcing me to pick between plasmids and guns does a disservice to the plasmids, because guns hold an inherent advantage. In a quick life or death fight, I'm not thinking about sorting through my spellbook. I'm thinking about how to kill this bloodthirsty drug addict as soon as possible. And in that scenario, a shotgun is always the most immediate answer. Swarming a man with bees is fun, no doubt, but the 12 gauge has a certain efficiency. Alright, that's enough criticism for the moment. We'll bench them as we get back to Jack's adventure through Rapture, heading into an area called Neptune's Bounty. Here are the first mentions of a man named Frank Fontaine. Fontaine was the yin to Ryan's yang, as the two men shared a lot in common. Both self-made men that came from nothing, possessing great self-confidence and a strong personality. The difference arises in the fact that Ryan made his fortune within the rules of society, while Fontaine very explicitly did not. He was a con man of the highest order, with even his last name of Fontaine being a lie after he killed the real Fontaine to take control of his fishing and smuggling company, thus putting Frank in proximity to gain entry to Rapture, where, in a city with a minimum of oversight, an expert con man could absolutely run the table, mostly operating within the city's rules, though he did still find a way to break the law, by smuggling outside goods into the city, which was one of Rapture's biggest no-nos since Ryan thought contact with the surface risked the city's discovery by the world powers. But Fontaine didn't care because he was too busy making money off of fish, smuggling, and Adam as the first big investor in the industry. Because of this, he was threatening to surpass Ryan as the richest man in Rapture, which, under the rules of the city, would have been alright. But that would have made Fontaine top man in the city that Andrew Ryan built. And Ryan didn't like that. He also just didn't like Fontaine. So one thing led to another, and Fontaine ended up getting riddled with bullets, which allowed Andrew Ryan to take over the Adam production business under his own company, a move which was almost universally hated within Rapture, even by Ryan's closest friends, and definitely contributed to the whole Civil War fiasco. But Ryan didn't really care, as now his spot at the top of the food chain was thoroughly secured. Back to Neptune's Bounty, it's unsurprising that the city's main source of food was fish, with this sort of harbor district being the hub. This is another thing that Bioshock does incredibly well: environmental storytelling, as each level is not only unique from each other, with their own grand take on Art Deco designs, but they also inform vital parts of the story, making Rapture feel like it could function as a city. The medical pavilion was where everyone got treated for injuries and illnesses. It's also a good tactic to have your game begin in a medical facility, as players are still new to the game and making a lot of mistakes, but ample medical supplies make it easy for them to bounce back quickly, thus smoothing the learning curve. Just wanted to point that out. After Neptune's Bounty, Jack heads to Arcadia, a garden at the bottom of the sea, a place that was vital to Rapture's survival as the trees there produced oxygen. Also key to the welfare of the citizens as it made an indoor space feel outdoor. reinforcing this idea that Rapture was more than just the world's most creative doomsday bunker. This was a place meant to survive and thrive separate from the rest of the world. Or at least that was the thought, until Ryan got the idea to charge people for entrance to the park, so even the concept of touching grass became monetized. Also, since I don't have much to say about this section, I'll take the opportunity to mention that I love the way this game handles weapon upgrades. 2 upgrades per gun, each one affecting a different aspect. Big, singular upgrades like this make it more appreciable on how much a weapon improves. Visual changes reinforce that, and gives me a sense of attachment to my equipment. Plus, they're all just creative and wacky. Help the chemical thrower use less fuel by attaching 3 pilot lights to the end. Weird, but I like it. Otherwise, Jack is able to save the underwater forest after Ryan attempts to poison the trees and cut off a large portion of the city's oxygen. He's resorted to radical tactics in order to eliminate Jack and Atlas, to the point he's willing to destroy large portions of his own creation if it means keeping it from those he deems unworthy. But once Jack is free of Arcadia, my most hated part of any Bioshock playthrough since most of it is under this dark green diarrhea haze, he is able to make it to Fort Frolic, the artistic heart of Rapture. Another example of a place designed to flourish even in these adverse conditions. And the fort may be... No, I'm gonna say it is the most memorable part of the game for anyone playing, because this is where we get to spend an evening with Sander Cohen. Now, Mr. Cohen is what happens when a greater demon of Slaanesh escapes the Warhammer 40k universe and infiltrates other IPs. He is an artist without any boundaries, an excessive and psychotic perfectionist driven to create but in constant pain over his own high standards. And in the rare cases that he does succeed, the pieces are only beautiful to Cohen himself, because they're snuff art. Originally, the fort was only meant to be a layover for Jack, as he couldn't catch a direct trip to Andrew Ryan. I didn't realize the bathyspheres were run by Southwest. However, the spidery Cohen traps Jack in Fort Frolic, never one to let something new pass by without stimulating him. So the deranged Cohen enlists Jack to help him complete a display made of photos of various men Jack is sent to kill around the district. It's clearly a filler section, as it has nothing to do with the plot to this point or the events afterwards, but it's elevated by the lavishness of this Vegas at the bottom of the sea, and the eccentricities of Cohen himself. One memorable moment halfway through the artwork's completion is when Cohen thinks that Jack is disgusted with the piece. Now, it's impossible to know if or not Jack really is put off, as the character has no voice and no face. The guy is nothing but a pair of disembodied arms, if you're curious enough to look. But that doesn't matter since Cohen is the focus, living in his own personal never-never land as his paranoia grows, perceiving critics everywhere and lashing out whenever he thinks he sees them. So he sends in splicers to kill Jack, though like anyone with a flair for the dramatic, Cohen makes sure to set it to some appropriate music. In this case, Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers. Fun story about this sequence, all the enemies in this section have reduced health, so as not to make it unfair or painful to play. It's actually rather fun. It's violent, but you've got the music going. It's not meant to be a do-or-die moment. And during playtesting, it was noted that multiple people used the game's melee weapon, the wrench, only swinging it in time with the music. Not anything wild. People will naturally gravitate toward the beat of any music, but I like to share that moment as these two elements came together, and even to this day people will still play this section only with the wrench, smashing skulls in time to music from the Nutcracker. However, there is a ruthless side to Cohen all the same, most notably in his feud with another artist named Anna Culpepper. Cohen was pro-Ryan even through the Civil War, creating art that expounded upon Rapture's glory. But Anna was against both of them, writing songs that criticized their actions, specifically Cohen, calling out his work as unhinged propaganda, which it totally was. Enraged, Cohen, through the willing assistance of Ryan, arranged for Anna to be drowned in her own bathtub by one of Ryan's men, his security chief by the name of Sullivan, who was so disgusted with the situation and himself that in the aftermath of the murder, Sullivan would end up self-terminating. A tragic little tale like so many others during the city's fall. Anyway, when the masterpiece is completed, Cohen reveals himself with fanfare and fireworks to an empty room with water leaking from the ceiling. Though to the man himself, this is an absolute red carpet event. For all this fun working with, and later killing, Sander Cohen, I do have one complaint about the man. It's that he makes such an explosive impression that he ends up overshadowing another secondary villain from earlier in the game. A very similar character in the medical pavilion named Dr. J.S. Steinman. And for the record, it's never established what the JS stands for. Steinman was a plastic surgeon in Rapture, and by all accounts quite a fantastic one at that. No surprises there, nearly everyone invited to the city was the top mind in his or her field. But then Adam came, and the ability to sculpt the human form with ease, raising the standards of the cosmetic surgeon even higher, though not from others, but from Steinman himself. Under the limitless possibilities of Adam, Steinman began to suffer from a paradox of choice. So many options and ways to improve people led the doctor to take less satisfaction from his work. It wasn't enough anymore to fix a nose, improve a jawline, or do a boob job. Now people could look like the absolute ideal of however they wanted to look. So what was the good doctor's excuse not to leave his patients looking like gods? And why stop there? Why do human beings have 2 eyes instead of like 4? By the time Jack finds him, Steinman has become a gibbering wreck that taunts himself with his past failures, trying to force himself to do better. And even looking at an ordinary face sends him into a violent, dissatisfied rage. He just wanted to make people beautiful, and he was always getting just so close. But the human form was imperfect, and there are some things you just can't improve. Poor little psychopath. But with all the sub-bosses of the city defeated, that just leaves Jack to deal with Andrew Ryan himself, holed up in the very core of Rapture, a district known as Hephaestus. How does an underwater city get its power? A deep-sea volcanic vent, providing geothermal power as well as heating. Again, a new level, and the environment explains a little more about the city. Delicious. Another great bit of environmental storytelling in the grotesque is the entrance to Andrew Ryan's office, where the man has displayed the impaled bodies of everyone who dared to turn against him. Photographs weren't good enough for Ryan, no sir. The man needed the true bodies to hang up for all to see. Bill McDonough is there, though there's some small comfort to be taken that his good relationship with Ryan's henchmen means that he was killed painlessly by a gunshot and impaled post-mortem. Another would-be assassin hung up on the trophy wall is a woman named Anya Andersdottir. She was actually a self-admitted believer in Rapture, until Ryan's hypocrisy showed through and the city began to collapse. Then when her daughter was kidnapped and changed into a little sister, Anya was pushed over the edge to make an attempt on Andrew Ryan's life. Despite her limited resources as a simple shoemaker, Anya was able to make great progress in her plan, making it all the way to Chief Engineer Keebers, who was working on an EMP device to gain access to Ryan's office. However, even though their interests aligned, a hugely paranoid Keebers would turn Anya over to Ryan, mistaking her to be a double agent from Ryan sent to test his loyalty. Following the trail of these two, Jack is able to complete the EMP, shorting out the electromagnetic locks on Ryan's office, allowing him in to confront the man face to face. However, upon making it to the man's office, Ryan has an epiphany to share with Jack. You see, among Ryan's other sins, lust was right in there with the rest. He had a mistress in Fort Frolic, a stripper he knew since before coming to Rapture named Jasmine Jolene. One night, Ryan's pullout game was too weak and he unknowingly got Jasmine pregnant. Unsure of how to handle the child, Jasmine was approached by none other than Frank Fontaine, offering to pay her for the embryo, to which she agreed. Ryan would learn about this sometime later and kill Jasmine in a fit of rage, though he was unaware Fontaine was the buyer or the full extent of the plan. With the able assistance of Adam, the child was grown to full adulthood in a matter of months, then implanted with false memories and kept under control as a sleeper agent activated with the phrase, "Would you kindly?" And that child is Jack. When the plane crashed, Jack was the cause, activated by his trigger phrase attached to a birthday present containing a handgun. This whole time, Jack has been shepherded by that phrase, fed to him by Atlas. And out of everyone, Andrew Ryan is the one to work it out and reveal it to Jack. And because I know some people don't know, that's the explanation for this room at the end. Ryan's thought process as he's been working out the details through the rest of the game, slowly connecting all the pieces. Unfortunately for old Andy, it's too little too late, though the guy has one more card left to play. Rather than let the city fall out of his control, Ryan sets the core to self-destruct. And when Jack rushes in to confront him, Andrew Ryan, the man who always prided himself on being the man in control, takes his fate into his hands one last time. Ryan hands Jack his 9-iron, then uses the command phrase to force Jack to kill him. Now, this has been regarded as one of the biggest and best twists in gaming, for pretty good reasons. There's a certain meta element here, as players follow the directions of another person without failure or deviation, and I enjoy that it has replay value as there are certain clues that a person won't appreciate on their first go-through. For example, upon heading to the backstage room where Jasmine Jolene's body still rests, Jack has a flash on the fabricated family of himself and his fictitious parents, with the camera specifically zooming in on the mother. A nice touch, and it speaks to a cardinal rule I've had for a good twist. They don't aim to shock, they aim to recontextualize actions and events. More than that, though, there is absolutely a disparaging way to view Ryan's actions. The classic gamer move of quitting before the match is over. You didn't win, I just lost. But I'm not so unfavorable towards Ryan. If he was gonna die, it would always be on his own terms. A man chooses, a slave obeys, and even when there's seemingly no choice left, there are always two ways to do something. He could run, he could hide, he could cower trying to delay the inevitable. Or he could hand the murder weapon to his own killer and embrace the end. As if it matters how a man falls down, but when the fall is all that's left, it matters a great deal. The same is true of Ryan's decision to destroy Rapture if that's what it takes. Like his decision to poison Arcadia if that was what it took. Like a story Ryan tells of owning a forest only to burn it to the ground when it was about to be taken from him. The morality of these decisions isn't great, and they're self-centered no matter what way you tell them, but they all come together to form a complete image of a character. If there's another villain I think about very similar to Andrew Ryan, it would be Thanos from the Avengers. In both cases, a lot of intelligent people have gone through the many reasons why their two ideologies are flawed and doomed to fail. And I'm not here to say that those arguments are wrong, but I do think that those people missed the forest for the trees. The point is not that their plans should be thoroughly and completely right. They are the villain after all, they should be wrong on some fundamental level. But the key factor is that they make sense to themselves. A complete circle of logic and self-justification. Do they have a history or some well-founded explanation that has brought them to this way of thinking? And Andrew Ryan does. I've been saving talking about Ryan's backstory to this point. Andrew Ryan was actually born as Andrei Ryanovsky, raised somewhere near Minsk at the time the Soviet Union was coming into form. And in the post-revolutionary state, Ryan got to see that massive turmoil. He witnessed family members being killed and was only barely able to escape thanks to his father before the same could happen to them. In America, he had to start all over from nothing, but with a bit of luck and a bit of skill was able to rise to astonishing levels of wealth and power, creating his mentality to help the good work of others when he saw it, like in Bill McDonough. But in the worst of times thinking, I lifted myself up by the bootstraps, what's their excuse? He had empathy, but only towards those who showed themselves to have potential. And in Rapture, Ryan wanted to create what he thought would be the perfect environment for people of high ambition like himself. A sort of free-range pasture for all the go-getters of the world without any boundaries. Forgetting that sometimes boundaries are necessary to keep the cows in and the poachers out. Andrew Ryan and Thanos are not psychopaths. They can and do help others because they're people. But their backgrounds of tragedy, habits of self-reliance, and the heights they were able to achieve breed this narcissism that they know for a solid fact that they are the only ones who can get things done. Everyone else isn't an idiot, but they haven't seen what I've seen. Honestly, I love this. Being able to carefully map out someone's characterization like that in fine detail. Get a really succinct view of their personality and what made them that way. And, if I may, I would just like to defend Andrew Ryan for one moment here. On the one hand, Ryan was a hypocrite who abandoned his morals in order to serve his own vanity, and many people would argue those ideals weren't even good in the beginning. But at the same time, Ryan was a creator. He had a vision of a great city and got it done because he thought it was right. From his relationship with Bill McDonough, Ryan was the sort to reward merit wherever he saw it. In his prime, he was a man of loyalty who built up those around him. And even in the end, when Bill turned against him as Ryan went off the deep end, Ryan himself couldn't bear to be there for Bill's execution. Still some scrap of compassion left within him. Ryan is the villain, I won't make two ways about it. But he's like Cohen. He's like Steinman. He's like all the splicers still roaming the halls of the dead city. All these people acting in total denial, saying that they're so close to getting things right, but incapable of accepting or recognizing how far they've fallen. Ryan believes that it's not over, that he can rebuild Rapture. There's a flicker, a spark of that great man still in there somewhere, but it's too weak, too beaten down by its surroundings to ever take hold again. In the fall of Rapture, there were two types of people, and I don't mean the two sides of the Civil War. There were those like Bill McDonough, Anna Culpepper, and Anya Andersdottir. Those who weren't blind to the situation around them, who didn't live in denial, who tried to take action. But in the end, they and everyone like them had to be silenced because they were ruining the illusion for everyone else. So if I had to summarize Andrew Ryan in brief, he's not a villain to be hated, he's a villain to be pitied. A capacity for great things ultimately squandered. Which is much more than I can say for the other major villain of the game, Atlas, or to use his real name, Frank Fontaine. Just now I've been loading up on praise and deep thoughts because that's probably the last of it we're going to see for the rest of the video. In the beginning I said that 33% of Bioshock's story wasn't great. Well, this is that back third. And what happens when you kill off your main villain 3.5 hours before the ending? Well, you gotta figure something out. Continuing to pull his strings with the trigger phrase, Atlas gets Jack to neutralize the city's self-destruct and turn over primary control of the automated systems to him, whereupon he reveals himself to be Frank Fontaine, having bought Jack as an embryo to move through Rapture using him as a proxy, since, as Ryan's illegitimate son, Jack shared partial genetic code with the leader of Rapture, allowing him to enjoy certain perks such as unrestricted access to bathysphere travel and partial confusion of the automated systems which would have otherwise gunned him down on the spot. But ultimately, he was a simple Fontaine surrogate via the implanted mind control. That all makes sense. What doesn't make sense is that once Fontaine has control, he immediately betrays Jack and attempts to kill him. And I mean, why? The guy still had Jack under his complete control. With the "would you kindly" phrase, he has a henchman who is completely incapable of disloyalty. But the story can't go on without an antagonist, so here's the betrayal, which is almost nearly retconned later as Fontaine acts like Jack is the one that turned against him.
Shame things turned out this way, kid. You and me run the table at this place. Now there's nothing left for you but a long, cold knuckle.
For me, Fontaine may be the most disappointing part of Bioshock. At least he's the most disappointing character. He lacks that thematic consistency I talked about with all the antagonists from Ryan down to the splicers living in denial. Fontaine's just kind of looking to loot the place, I guess wanting to take all the Atom to the surface to sell it or something. I don't know, it's never really fleshed out why he wants to run Rapture, this half-sunken hellhole at the bottom of the sea, and a couple of points he even talks about destroying the city when he leaves at some point. When people talk about Bioshock, they tend not to talk too much about Fontaine, because there's not a lot to talk about. Ryan was a nutcase, but he had characterization. Fontaine has characterization too, though it's extremely messy. Within the confines of the game, he has a reputation for being so ruthless that it would put Andrew Ryan's trophy wall to shame. In the Bioshock book, he's portrayed as having this almost secret agent level of wit, taking on multiple personalities just to gain entry to Rapture, then playing people off each other once he's inside, to the point he faked his own death. But when it comes time to meet the man in-game, neither of those elements are present. He's not particularly ruthless or brutal since all he does is send security bots after Jack, just like Ryan did. He's not particularly cunning, since all he does is call up Jack occasionally with a laundry list of 1950s wise guy talk, and it leaves Fontaine to be frankly underwhelming. Pun not intended, but I'm not taking it out either. He has got one trick to stop Jack, and when that fails, it's time to turn himself into a bronze statue for the final boss fight. Following the betrayal of Fontaine, Jack is only able to escape with the able assistance of one Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum. She was one of the two main scientists to perfect Atom and the Little Sisters, with the other key mind being Dr. Yi Su-chong. Now, Su-chong was a real nasty piece of work, a morally bankrupt collaborator who got exactly what was coming to him. But Tenenbaum actually managed to grow a conscience to the awful work she was doing, so undertook a campaign to undo everything, working to reverse the process that created Little Sisters, turning them back into normal-ish little girls, and helping Jack to undo his mental conditioning. I wish I could say more about Tenenbaum, but there isn't much. She's not awful, she does have a decent character arc from absolute monster to voice of morality, though she's never much more than just the new voice in Jack's ear. A new supporting character for the player to trust after the rug got pulled out from under them by Atlas. Not great, not awful. But with her assistance, Jack is able to fully undo his mental conditioning. And you know what? Despite everything, the level design still holds up. Like, here is where the rich people live. Here is where the poor people live. Here's the place where people got hung up like Christmas tree ornaments. And here's the place where things went wrong. I have a real big soft spot for places like this. It's a part of the reason I love the Fallout franchise and specifically Lonesome Road. Just these places where you can feel something really bad happened. And yeah, that's present throughout most of Rapture, but I think about the entrance to Apollo Square most out of all of them. The place right afterward is alright too, Point Prometheus, a sort of museum converted into Big Daddy production. Alright, I can dig it. Though I can't dig the escort section that comes right after it. I don't think I even need to explain the awful nature of this sequence, because everyone that played it has hated it. And even if you haven't played it, I still think it's plain to see. Walk slowly to follow the little girl. If she gets shot too much, go back to the last checkpoint. And why do I even have to do this? Why have I got to get dressed up like a big daddy to lure in a little sister, but then don't use a little sister? We just use one of the normal girls, of which we've seen Tenenbaum has about 20. So why are we going through this charade when I just need the kid to open some doors? Fort Frolic was padding in a good way because it was bright and creepy. This is padding the playtime in a bad way because it's boring and frustrating. But once that's complete, there's the final boss fight with Fontaine, who's been juiced up with all the Adam in Rapture. Once again, kids, do not juice. It makes your heart explode, and worse than that, it makes your package smaller. Otherwise, this boss fight is stupid easy even on the harder difficulties because Fontaine does not comprehend that I have unlimited power thanks to the chemical thrower. With Fontaine dead on the floor, the game splits into one of two endings. If Jack was a good boy, he adopts several of the little girls freed from their bonds of being a little sister, taking them to the surface and raising them to adulthood as he supports them with all of his 0 marketable skills. I don't know who would hire him because the man doesn't even have a birth certificate. On the other hand, if Jack was a bad boy, he and a bunch of splicers take to the surface, hijacking a submarine with nuclear warheads. And that's about it. This is the end result of a binary moral choice system. You get two radically different conclusions, neither one of which is overly satisfying. Though later in the DLC for Bioshock Infinite it would be confirmed that the good ending is canonical. So you can see what I mean at the beginning talking about the conflict that arises when talking about Bioshock. On the one hand, you've got Ryan as this understandable but deeply flawed man who people can and have talked about for hours. Then on the other hand, you've got Fontaine who just wants to make money but doesn't really have any goal of what he would spend that money on. So it's a mixed bag. But whatever criticisms I may level towards the game, I still like Bioshock. Whether it's a survival horror, a survival action, or an immersive sim, though I've never been entirely clear on exactly what an immersive sim is. I don't much care about classifying exactly what it is, I just know that I like it for its unique setting with wacky people. And when I criticize it, that's only because those awful parts are all the more noticeable when they're on an otherwise pristine surface. But gold is still gold even if it has some stains on it. That being said, when I was discussing making this video with a few buddies of mine, one of them asked me if he should play the Bioshock games. He already knew the story of the first game through cultural osmosis, so with that in mind, I actually recommended he play Bioshock 2 instead. And why would I say such a heinous thing? Well, I'll have to play Bioshock 2 to fully explain, won't I? But as for you right now, having made it this far, let me just offer my thanks. It does mean a lot when I see people have made it all the way through to the end of the video and or leave a comment, because that usually means I've done something right. I hope you enjoyed yourself and I can expect to see you again for the next video. Or if you're greedy and impatient, you can see me again right now in another video like this one. Ryan doesn't own us, okay? I gotcha. I'm such an asshole. I turn my head upside down to read that, and then I'm like, I go over to this one. Why is that one no. Flip your head right side up. I'm the smart man. I'm the smartest man in this room.